This audiobook is a production of Middlemass Press, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Festival is a stand-alone adventure featuring the world, characters, and themes from the novel King of Middlemass. The adventure is narrated by Linda Fox and written by Toby Boy. For more great stories like these, search Amazon.com for Toby Boy and for Middlemass. Thank you for listening.
Breakfast at the cottage. The morning light filtered through lace curtains, casting soft, shifting patterns across the wooden floor of the cottage's kitchen. It was a picturesque little home tucked neatly between the wilder corners of Middlemass and the sprawling, orderly fields of the homesteader family next door. The space smelled faintly of cinnamon, coffee, and tobacco, broken by the occasional sharp sizzle of bacon in the cast-iron skillet on the stove. Annette sat at the small breakfast table, its surface lovingly scuffed from years of meals and quiet conversations. She wore a cardigan that hung loosely off her shoulder. Her gaze was focused on a fashion magazine, not so much reading as glancing over the illustrations. Her mouth tugged into a small, thoughtful frown. Emily, dressed in an apron, stood at the stove, turning the bacon with a practiced flick of her wrist. She was humming softly, a tune that felt both familiar and unplaceable. The sound was comforting in its casualness, the kind of thing that made the space feel more like home. Her mother, seated across the kitchen table, was smoking something indeterminate, her nails clacking absently against her bracelets. "Do you ever think about how mornings like these are numbered?" Annette asked suddenly. Emily turned, one eyebrow raised, spatula in hand. "Numbered? That's morbid for breakfast, don't you think?" Annette shrugged, folding the magazine neatly and setting it aside. "It's just, we don't stay in these moments forever. They slip away when you aren't looking, that's all." Emily smirked, setting a plate of bacon on the table. "Well, that's a cheery thought for the day. Would you like your coffee extra bitter to match the mood?" Annette rolled her eyes. She reached for a slice of bacon as Emily returned to the stove. Before she could bite into it, a sharp knock at the door interrupted them. All three women froze briefly, exchanging curious glances. It wasn't often they received visitors who knocked. Annette sighed, placing the bacon on her plate. "I'll get it." She crossed the room and opened the door to find a young delivery boy standing awkwardly on the stoop. He held a small ornate envelope in his hands, its edges gilded, and the paper so pristine it looked out of place against the boy's ink-smudged fingers. "For Miss Annette and Mr. Rivers," the boy said hesitantly, squinting at the names written in elegant script. Annette's brow furrowed. "Mr. Rivers?" "Yes, ma'am, it says so right here," the boy replied, thrusting the envelope toward her. Emily turned from the stove, now openly curious. "Who's sending you both something so fancy?" Annette ignored the question, taking the envelope carefully. The weight of it was surprising, the paper thick and expensive beneath her fingers. She turned it over, revealing a deep red wax seal embossed with a design she couldn't immediately place. Some kind of stylized sunburst or crown. "Thank you," she said, closing the door before the boy could offer anything else. She held the envelope up, examining it in the light. "Well," Emily prompted, stepping closer. Aren't you going to open it? Annette slid a nail beneath the seal, breaking it cleanly. The envelope gave way with a soft crackle, and she pulled out a single folded sheet of heavy parchment. As she unfolded it, an invitation revealed its elaborate calligraphy. You are hereby invited to attend festival at Solstice Court, an evening of tradition, celebration, and prestige, honoring promising couples of Middlemass, held under the midsummer moon. There was more, but Annette's eyes stopped there, her breath catching slightly. She read it again, her expression tightening. Emily leaned in warmly, reading over her shoulder. Promising couples, she said, a teasing lilt in her voice. And who figured out that you and Rivers are a couple? Annette snapped the invitation shut. It's ridiculous, a mistake. Someone's idea of a joke. Her mother, sidelining a cigarillo in favor of playing with her lighter, chuckled softly. Oh, it's no mistake, dear. Festival's been around forever. My own auntie attended. Very prestigious. Annette turned to her, incredulous. Prestigious? It sounds ridiculous. It's tradition, Annette. I won't need to remind you how important that is to us. Emily grinned, clearly enjoying her sister's discomfort. Well, Rivers will be thrilled, I'm sure. Nothing says romance like an archaic pagan ball. Annette raised her chin in indignation, sinking back into her chair. She slapped the invitation loosely across her lap, staring at it as though it might burst into flames. Emily returned to the stove, her laughter soft and teasing. You'd better tell him soon. Something tells me he'd want to know. Daydream. The grounds were an ode to opulence, a sunken garden with a Grecian flourish. Marble statues posed in the artful decay of antiquity, their smooth limbs casting long shadows on hedgerows sculpted with geometric precision. Pathways wove through the gardens, leading visitors past fountains, their sprays catching the late afternoon light. Beyond the gardens stretched the vast emerald sprawl of an American lawn, its perfection punctuated by the looming silhouette of the manor house. Rivers moved with easy confidence, his white-on-white attire making him look like he had stepped out of a Gatsby daydream. His shirt was perfectly pressed, the faintest shadow of suspenders visible through the fabric, and his crisp trousers ended just above polished shoes that crunched happily. He casually carried both his suitcase and Annette's, one in each hand. His dark hair retained a rebellious edge, a wayward curl brushing his temple. Annette walked beside him, her own white ensemble a study in understated sophistication. The skirt clicked just so, and the sleeveless sweater accentuated her angelic quality. Her hair was swept back, revealing the clean line of her jaw. She wore the kind of jewelry that whispered instead of shouting, her chin slightly raised as if the world were presenting itself for her approval. She spared only the briefest of glances for the other couples, also clad in white, who passed by with careful smiles and murmured greetings. Older figures stood apart, their clothing more formal, their presence more regular. They were spectators of tradition, their sharp gazes cataloging every movement and exchange. Rivers and Annette were not immune to their scrutiny, though Annette's composed expression suggested she had decided long ago not to care. Coming down the lane in the opposite direction were the players. A lion with a mane of thick, looped yarn lumbered past, its golden eyes fixed on some distant horizon. A Titania followed, her gown glittering as though strung with starlight. Rivers shifted the weight of the suitcases in his hands. without breaking stride, the effort invisible to all but Annette, who raised a single eyebrow as a frog prince doffed his cap and bowed deeply in her direction. She did not return the gesture, nor did she speak, her gaze fixed ahead on the grand double doors that stood open to welcome them. The portal was enormous, the rich wood gleaming under an arch carved with images of fauna. Inside, the cavernous welcome hall yawned with space and grandeur. "It's all more handsome than I expected," Rivers ventured, his voice low but pleasant, as though they were simply commenting on the weather. Annette did not look at him, her tone neutral but not unkind. "I am prepared to be impressed." "I hear the feasts are exemplary," Randy Rivers added, his voice dropping to a near whisper as they stepped across the threshold. High table. Now dressed in black ties or strapless gowns, the honored couples sat at the high table. The table's arrangement, however, held small peculiarities. Among the pairs of young men and women, there sat a solitary figure, the family heir. He was an angular young man. Skin pale, eyes deep as though they held secrets far older than his years. His posture, leaning slightly forward with his elbows resting on the table, suggested a weariness that no grooming could mask. Unlike the other honorees, he had no date. The empty chair beside him, a silent invitation that none had dared to fill. To his left sat a hopeful young man. The hopeful was broad-shouldered and square-jawed, with a farmhand's build softened by the veneer of his formal wear. His thick, warm, sun-bleached hair had been cropped for the occasion. His eyes swept over the high table with eager intensity, though he sat beside a radiant young woman in a midnight blue gown. He appeared more interested in the evening's social pageantry. The high table was a place of distinction, but it was equally a display. Upon that pedestal, everyone dining on the floor below could look up and gaze at them. Every gesture, framed in the soft glow of chandeliers that dangled like gilded stalactites from the high ceilings. The couples themselves had been carefully curated, their polished appearances and poised manners forming the centerpiece of the evening spectacle. But they had competition. Across the grand dining hall, a stage rose on the opposite side, slightly elevated above the sea of polished tables and bustling caterers. Upon that stage, a simply smashing rendition of Egyptian passion had reached a crescendo. Osiris, his headdress gleaming under the stage lights, knelt before a painted backdrop depicting a hillside tower in the hazy distance. The painted strokes were bold and deliberate, their artistry suggestive of ancient truths barely veiled. Then the host appeared again. Rivers, seated further down the table, crossed his arms. His gaze narrowed onto the robed and veiled figure who stepped onto the stage with an air of practiced mystery. The host's arrival unsettled the delicate balance of the performance, an interruption that Rivers could only categorize as offensive. "I know, darling," Annette said smoothly, breaking his train of thought as if reading his mind. Her tone was light but held an edge of amusement. She snapped up her fork, pierced a particularly large piece of charred, sizzling chicken, and deposited it onto his plate with the precision of a diplomat brokering a ceasefire. "Have some of this. It'll take your mind off it." The host raised his arms wide. The gesture commanded silence. His voice carried through the hall. "Does Osiris see the tower?" he intoned. "Or was it destroyed, as had long been foretold to him?" For a moment, the hall held its breath, the weight of the audience participation pressing down on every table. Then, The hopeful young man at the high table rose. His movements were deliberate, as though he had been forewarned. He spoke with clarity and conviction. Though the tower was struck by thunder, it stands eternal. The response was greeted with an eruption of applause, a wave of relieved approval rippling across the room. Rivers caught Annette's eye. The young man's chosen reply was one of the responses known to steer the play away from its most tragic ending. From the stage, the host inclined his veiled head slightly, his expression inscrutable. Beside the hopeful man, the heir's lips quirked into a faint smile, one so fleeting it double up. The suite was classy without the insecurities of ostentation. The queen-sized bed, draped in immaculate white linens, sat atop a polished wooden dais that gave it a stage-like prominence. An adjacent sunken sitting area with its tufted leather armchairs and a low marble coffee table invited long conversations. The room was washed in a soft golden glow from sconces mounted on the pale textured walls, their light diffused by artful shades. Rivers stood near the bed, dressed in a plain cotton nightshirt and matching pants. His suitcase lay open on the bed, clothes folded with sharp creases, toiletries tucked into compartments, and a small shaving kit. He unzipped the kit, revealing not aftershave, but a large beige walkie-talkie, its surface slightly scuffed from use. He pressed the button on the side, his voice low and deliberate. "Engineer, engineer, this is Handsome One. Over." The walkie crackled, the static buzzing faintly before fading. Rivers frowned, crossing his arms, his fingers tapping an impatient rhythm against his bicep. He moved to press the button again, but before he could, a voice broke through. "You are lucky I put up with your shenanigans, Mr. Rivers. But you were right. There were unsettling distortions in your signal soon after you arrived." The door to the suite rattled faintly. Rivers snapped his head toward it, his body taut with anticipation. Without a word, he pressed the walkie's button again. His tone clipped. "Call me back." He let go of the button and quickly zipped the shaving kit. Without missing a beat, Rivers snapped the suitcase shut and swiped it off the bed. The door opened and Annette swept into the room with the grace of someone who knew exactly how much attention she commanded. She wore a black camisole that stopped just shy of the top of her thighs, her bare legs catching the ambient light as she turned to close the door behind her. Her movements were languid, as though the maze-like corridors of Solstice Court hadn't worn on her in the least. "This place is like a maze," she remarked, spinning to face him with a faintly amused expression. Awfully bold of them to assign the couples to the same room. Rivers leaned against the bedpost. "I have written a letter in protest," he said, "but I haven't had a chance to send it yet." Annette crossed the room with deliberate ease, her bare feet silent against the plush carpet. She waved a hand toward the bed, a gesture that clearly meant he should get in. Rivers complied, pulling back the covers and settling himself against the crisp pillows. Annette climbed onto the bed beside him. She adjusted the sheets, pulling them over both of them. Her arm draped over his chest. Her fingers splayed lightly against the fabric of his shirt. Her knee found its place over his thigh, her body fitting against his as though this were the most natural arrangement in the world. "Don't get used to it," she murmured as a reminder. Overheard. The guest wing of the manor was a labyrinth The disorienting architecture seemed willfully deceptive. It was simple enough to enter, one turn, then another, but as soon as a guest looked back, the entrance would have blended seamlessly into the stone walls, vanishing behind them. False doors lined the hallways, promising egress only to deliver dead ends. Secret panels whispered open and shut, and the halls impossibly could lead one in circles without ever betraying the trick. The young heir moved through the wing. His steps were careful but quick, his eyes darting from door to door, searching for some forgotten corner where he might hide. He just wanted an unoccupied bed. Anywhere he could close his eyes and escape the looming conclusion of festival for a few hours. He turned a corner, his hand brushing lightly against the cold stone wall for balance, when a flicker of movement caught his eye. He stopped abruptly. Behind him, the veiled figure of the host emerged from the dim candlelight. The ornate mask shimmered faintly, its edges catching the soft glow. The thick robes swayed as he stepped forward, their rich fabric whispering against the stone. The light from the candelabras played tricks with the shadows, casting unnervingly human shapes across the walls. The air froze, his breath shallow, his body trembling. He clenched his fists at his sides, his knuckles white, as he fought the primal urge to run. "You seem lost," the host said, his voice, something that bordered on pity. I can't do this," the heir stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He tried to straighten his posture, but his legs felt like water beneath him. "I thought I could. I thought I understood. But I can't give up my life." The host tilted his head. He took another step forward, the hem of his robe brushing against the stone. "You knew the tradition," he said, his tone measured, even soothing. "The honor it carried. You knew what would be asked of you." The heir's breath hitched. Tears welled in his eyes, and he blinked them away furiously. "I didn't think it was real," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Not like this. Please, don't make me do this." The host remained silent for a long moment, his veiled face unreadable. Then he sighed, a soft, almost human sound. "You are my favorite," he said simply. "You always were. I've watched over you. If it is your fear alone that holds you back, then let it be assuaged. I will spare you the honors." The heir's head snapped up, his eyes wide and wet with disbelief. "You will?" "I will," the host repeated, his tone carrying a faint note of sadness. "But you must help me find another. Festival must have its offering." The heir's shoulders sagged with relief, the tension in his body releasing all at once. "Thank you," he breathed, the words tumbling out in a rush. I'll help you." The host inclined his head, a gesture of acknowledgement, before stepping back into the shadows. His voice lingered, low and final. "Go now. The night grows long." The heir nodded, swallowing hard, and turned away. He didn't notice the figure concealed in the dark alcove behind him, a young hopeful clutching a towel and a bar of soap, his expression frozen in shock. Face pale, breathing shallow as he pressed himself against the back wall. The heir walked away, his footsteps receding down the endless hallway. Hopeful stayed where he was, his heart pounding in his chest. He had heard everything, and though his mind screamed at him, his stone legs refused to obey. Second day brunch at the high table was a tableau of culinary extravagance, designed to distract even the most vigilant of guests. Platters of quivering aspic towers glistened under soft morning light, their jewel-like contents preserved in impossible suspension. Saffron-dusted quail eggs nested atop buttery croissants, while pale, artfully sliced peaches lay draped over delicate crepes, as if they had been positioned by a painter rather than a chef. The centerpiece, a glistening crystal bowl of chilled watermelon balls, each as flawless and pink as a pearl, radiated coolness into the air. Despite the lavish spread, the mood at the high table was uneven. The absence of the young heir cast a faint shadow over the affair. The other couples scattered across the dais maintained politeness, but tension rippled. The sea of tables from the previous night were now rolled to the sides, a quiet reminder of the evening's coming festivities. From the couples in attendance, a low but pointed exchange broke the surface of conversation. The hopeful's date leaned close. "Leave, you were the one who convinced me of how important this event was. There are still 2 more days left. What will we tell my family if we return early?" The hopeful grimaced, his hands gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles paled. He turned away, his jaw tight, unable to articulate his unease. How could he explain the dread that clawed at him, the whispered warnings his mind insisted on repeating? How could he confess, here in public, that he felt himself slipping into some unseen trap? Across the table, Annette caught the moment, her arched brow a silent inquiry directed at Rivers. Without breaking his stride, Rivers returned her gaze and popped one of the chilled watermelon balls into his mouth. He chewed, his expression the picture of deliberate nonchalance. The sudden clamor of a curtain rising silenced all murmurs, drawing every gaze to the stage at the far end of the hall. The spotlight slammed on, its stark beam illuminating not actors, but a strange, makeshift hut at the center of the stage. The structure was crude but unsettling, its jagged edges and darkened entrance suggestive of something primal. From the hut's blackened doorway, 2 puppets lurched forward into the light. The first was immediately recognizable, a punch puppet, with its hooked red nose and iconic tricorner hat. The second, however, was a bizarre creation, a spotted horse puppet with unnervingly fearful eyes, its painted expression frozen somewhere between panic and absurdity. "Oh ho!" Punch howled, his exaggerated falsetto filling the hall. "You've been listening at doorways and peeping through keyholes!" The horse jerked its head wildly, its dopey, drawling voice protesting in exaggerated panic. Not me, you see. I'm just a horse as deaf and dumb as I can be." The creature's crude movements elicited a nervous reaction that rippled through the room. Punch, however, was not swayed. He produced a beater stick from thin air, brandishing it with theatrical menace. Nay, I say," the horse pleaded, bobbing frantically. "Put that stick away." In a sudden subversion, Punch cast the stick aside. It clattered loudly onto the stage, the sound punctuated by a few polite scoffs from the high table. Next, Punch lunged at the horse, grabbing it by the neck. The horse puppet flailed wildly, its panicked motions crossing the line from comedic to unsettling. Punch began to spin with the horse in a dance macabre. "Let me inside your mind. Your mind is mine." The moment stretched, lewd and jarring, as the puppet's interplay became uncomfortably intimate. Punch's words echoed, their rhythm invasive, as if they were burrowing into the collective consciousness of the room. The hopeful's date looked around for a consensus, her carefully composed expression faltering. Finally, she delivered her assessment with forced lightness. Well, that was different. But the hopeful was beyond politeness. With a sharp, deliberate movement, he threw his napkin onto the table. He pushed his chair back roughly, the sound reverberating, and leapt down from the dais without using the stairs. He marched across the floor, his determined strides cutting through the sea of arriving attendees like a blade. The crowd's murmur swelled in his wake, their curiosity tinged with unease. Annette had seen enough. Her gaze, sharp and calculating, flicked to Rivers. Stay or leave, Riv. Rivers, ever the strategist, nodded in thought, his brow furrowed. Then he offered an idea. Tell you what, let's stick together at all times until we're free and clear. We'll call it the buddy system. Annette pursed her lips in approval. She reached for a champagne stem, raising it with a deliberate grace. "And who is this buddy?" she asked. Rivers leaned in conspiratorially. "Why, the horse, of course. The horse's name is Buddy." Annette deftly covered her mouth with her hand, ensuring the champagne stayed in as she let out a soft laugh. Then, with an expression that was both rare and wickedly feminine, she gave Rivers a pointed sneer. He did sound like a buddy, didn't he? Their moment of levity cut through the growing tension. But as the puppet spun back into the darkness of the hut, and as the curtain fell and the spotlight dimmed, a sense of unease lingered, like the last note of a song that rang on forever, refusing to abate. Hopeful's flight. The hopeful, sick with the unbearable evidence of his eyes and ears, ran through the labyrinthine halls of Solstice Court, his steps sure. Yet the twisting staircases, the narrow, unmarked corridors, it was as though the building itself was alive, its architecture shifting subtly to guide him toward its dark center. He found himself in a long, dimly lit hallway, the flickering sconces casting uneasy shadows that leapt and twisted with every step. His pulse thundered in his ears, a frantic counterpoint to the footsteps growing louder behind him. Panic surged as he turned his head, only to see figures emerge from the gloom, the host and the heir. They moved with a predatory elegance, the flickering candelabra in the host's hand threw distorted shadows against the stone walls. The host's veiled figure loomed, inscrutable, and all the more terrifying for it, while the heir's pale face betrayed no emotion, his steps mechanical. The hopeful's breath quickened as a strange, invasive pressure settled over his mind. His thoughts became sluggish, fraying at the edges, as if unseen fingers were unspooling the threads of his will. His limbs felt heavy, his panic useless against the suffocating weight. Desperation flared. He reached blindly for the nearest object, a heavy brass candlestick resting on a side table. With trembling hands, he swung it in a wide, frantic arc. The weapon connected with the heir's temple in a sickening collision of metal and bone. The sound reverberated through the hall, sharp and final. The heir's body crumpled, lifeless, folding unnaturally to the floor. For a moment, time held its breath. Then, the host let out a roar, a sound both human and otherworldly, raw with rage and grief. It echoed through the corridor, shaking the very air, and the hopeful froze, his body seizing in terror. The host moved with impossible speed, his robes a blur of shadow and wrath. Before the hopeful could raise the candlestick again, the host was upon him, his veiled face an abyss of fury. The hopeful's last moments were brief and violent. The candlestick clattered to the ground, its weight meaningless. Moments later, his lifeless body lay sprawled beside the heir's. The flickering light from the candelabra cast long shadows over the scene. translating the remaining figure into myriad grotesque dancing shapes. Firepower Rivers and Annette slipped away from the grand hall, their footsteps muffled against the plush carpeting. The corridors stretched ahead of them, promising escape, but the sprawling architecture of the manor seemed intent on betraying that promise. Where they expected the main entrance and the welcoming expanse of the green lawn, they found only more twisting hallways, each turn folding them deeper into the labyrinth. Rivers frowned, his brow knit in frustration. "How is this even possible, he muttered, glancing over his shoulder as if the walls themselves were conspiring. Annette, her calm unshaken, pressed ahead. "It's just a trick of the layout," she replied. "I can still get us through." He nodded. Soon, their aim shifted to returning to their suite. Both of them had surprises waiting in their suitcases, contingencies against whatever dangers lurked. As they pressed on, an oppressive silence swallowed their tentative conversation. It was who saw it first. The body sprawled across the floor at the intersection of two corridors. She stopped abruptly, and Rivers, following close behind, collided into her shoulder before freezing at the sight. The heir's lifeless form lay in a crumpled heap, his pallid face turned to the side, his hands slack at his sides. Rivers's breath caught. "He's dead," Annette murmured, stepping closer. Her jaw tightened with determination as she crouched to inspect the scene, her voice low but certain. Rivers gripped her arm firmly, pulling her back. "We need to get you out of here," he said, dread pressing on every word. Annette raised an eyebrow, but she nodded, allowing herself to be led away. As they navigated the maze-like corridors, they stumbled upon a room that stopped them cold. A funerary chamber, stark and ceremonial. A single slab stood at its center, the hopeful's lifeless body laid upon it. His arms were crossed like those of an ancient king, a heavy brass candlestick clutched tightly in his hands. The sight was macabre, reverent, and wrong in a way that made Rivers's stomach twist. Before either of them could speak, a figure emerged from behind the heavy drapes that framed the room. The host. Veiled and resplendent in his ornate robes, he loomed over the corpse slab. Rivers staggered, his knees buckling as his mind was assaulted by crushing shadow fingers. His vision blurred and his hands shot to his temples as though to hold his skull together. Annette moved swiftly, stepping between Rivers and the host, her voice cutting through the suffocating tension. "Enough of this," she snapped. The host turned his veiled gaze toward her, his hand rising slowly, as if preparing to unleash his malice upon her. Annette's eyes narrowed, and with a deliberate, underhanded motion, she unclenched her fingers, summoning the inner flame. A brilliant spark crackled from her palm, igniting a second sun which blazed into existence within the room. The fire consumed the host, his inhuman scream piercing the air as his veiled form disintegrated into a cascade of ash and a rising wisp of smoke. The force of the flame pushed back the shadow, leaving only scorched walls and silence in their wake. Rivers, still clutching his sore head, stumbled to his feet. "Sorry, kid," he muttered, his voice thick with guilt and exhaustion. "Bastard took me by surprise. I shouldn't have put you in this position. I don't take it lightly." Annette glanced at him, her face impassive but her eyes betraying a hint of weariness. She said nothing, brushing ash from her skirt, then steadying him with a warm shoulder. Epilogue. As the first light of dawn broke over Solstice Court, Rivers and Annette emerged from the manor, Rivers holding the suitcases more heavily this time. The grand green lawn stretched before them, dewy and peaceful. Rivers budged Annette heavily with his shoulder. Annette arched an eyebrow, producing an official parchment in one hand and with the other an ornately decorated festival coin purse from her scorched handbag. "Let's just agree to tell everyone that we were declared the king and queen of festival." Rivers let out a tired laugh, shaking his head. "Deal," he said simply. Side by side, they crossed the expansive lawn, the fresh morning air filling their lungs as they left the elegant suites of Solstice Court behind. Beyond the sunken garden, their steps grew lighter as they neared the edge of the grounds, their thoughts turning to the quiet streets of Middlemass and the promise of normalcy that awaited them there.
Festival is a standalone adventure featuring the world, characters, and themes from the novel King of Middlemass. The adventure is narrated by Linda Fox and written by Toby Boy. For more great stories like these, search Amazon.com for Toby Boy and for Middlemass. Thank you for listening.